The candles on the cake are already lit when I hear the key turn in the front door. I count 3 seconds, the exact amount of time it takes my sister to walk from the entryway to the kitchen doorway, and I make sure my smile is ready before she appears. 37 candles. I stayed up past midnight to make the red velvet from scratch, because store-bought never tastes right to her, and because this is the first birthday she will celebrate since finishing treatment, and because some part of me still believes that if I do everything perfectly, she will eventually become the person I have been making excuses for my entire life. She stops in the doorway and looks at the cake, then at me, then at the small banner I taped above the window that says "Welcome home, Hannah." "You didn't have to do all this," she says. "I wanted to," I say. She sits down at the table, our grandmother's table, in our grandmother's house, the house she left to both of us when she passed 4 years ago, and she looks at the candles flickering and she says, very quietly, almost to herself, "You know what would really make this birthday perfect?" I am already reaching for the lighter to relight the one that went out. "What's that?" "If you weren't here." I put the lighter down. She looks up and meets my eyes, and I see something there that I have seen 1,000 times, but never let myself name. It is not cruelty exactly. It is something colder. Satisfaction. "I've been thinking about it for a while," she says. "This house is too small for 2 people, and honestly, Clara, you've been suffocating me. Even when I was sick, you were always hovering, always watching. It was exhausting." I do not say anything. There is nothing to say. The candles keep burning down into the frosting. "I think you should start looking for your own place," she says. "That would be the best gift you could give me." She picks up the fork I set beside the plate, and she cuts herself a slice of the cake I stayed up making, and she takes a bite and says it needs more sugar. I leave the kitchen. I go upstairs to the bedroom that used to be mine when we were children, the one with the window that looks out over the oak tree our grandfather planted, and I sit on the edge of the bed and I do not cry. I am 31 years old and I have spent the last 2.5 years rearranging my entire life around my sister's illness, and she just told me I was suffocating her. I think about the day she called me. I had just gotten a job offer in Denver, a head nurse position at a children's hospital, the kind of role I had been working toward for 6 years. I had already told my boyfriend, Marcus, who had been talking about us finally moving in together. I had already started looking at apartments online. I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot when my phone rang, and my sister's voice came through the speaker, and she said the words, "Stage 2, breast cancer. The doctors want to start treatment right away." I turned down the job the next day. Marcus and I lasted another 3 months before the distance, not physical distance, but the emotional distance of someone who has stopped being present finally finished us. I moved back into our grandmother's house to help with appointments, medications, grocery runs, insurance calls. I took a per diem nursing position that paid less and offered no benefits because the schedule was flexible enough to work around her treatments. I gave up 2.5 years of my life, and she just told me I was suffocating her. I pull out my phone and I open my banking app the way I always do, when I need to feel like something in my life is still in order, still making sense. I am not a person who checks her balance every day, but I have been working extra shifts lately because the household expenses have been higher than I expected, and I wanted to see where things stood. The number on the screen does not make sense. I look at it again. My savings account, the account I have been contributing to since I was 22 years old, the account that held just over $40,000 the last time I checked, which was maybe 6 weeks ago, shows a balance of $4,211. I sit very still. I go to the transaction history. I have to scroll for a long time. There are charges to a medical billing company I do not recognize, a payment to a contractor listed only as RH Services, several transfers marked simply as household maintenance, a charge to a pharmacy for nearly $3,000 on a single day, a wire transfer, which I have never once initiated from this account for $8,000 to an account I do not recognize. My hands are shaking when I go back downstairs. My sister is on the couch watching television. The cake is still on the table with 2 slices missing now, and I stand in the doorway and I say, very carefully, "Can you explain these transactions?" She does not look away from the screen. "What transactions?" I read several of them out loud. She sighs the way she always sighs when I am inconveniencing her. "The roof needed repairs. The contractor had to start before we could talk about it because you were working nights. And the pharmacy charges are from my prescriptions you knew treatment wasn't fully covered. This wire transfer," I say, $8,000. to an account I've never seen. I didn't authorize that. She finally looks at me. You must have forgotten. You were exhausted back then, Clara. You said yourself you were running on 4 hours of sleep. I did not wire $8,000 somewhere and forget about it. She turns back to the television. I really don't want to fight on my birthday. I go back upstairs and I call the bank from my bedroom with the door closed. The customer service representative pulls up the account and confirms the wire transfer. It was initiated in person at a branch location. When I ask which branch, she gives me an address 20 minutes from the house. When I ask what documentation was provided, she hesitates and says she can connect me with the fraud department. That is the word that makes everything click into place. Fraud. I tell her yes, please connect me. The fraud specialist is a man named David, and he is kind and unhurried even though it is almost 9 in the evening. He explains that initiating a wire transfer of that size requires the account holder to appear in person with a valid ID and to sign authorization documents. He asks if I have recently given anyone access to my account or my identification. I think about my wallet that I leave on the kitchen counter because I am in and out all day, and I never thought there was any reason not to. My wallet with my driver's license inside it. I tell David that I did not authorize any of these transactions. I tell him I believe someone may have used my identification without my consent. He tells me that constitutes fraud and that he is opening a case immediately, and that I should come into the branch first thing in the morning with any documentation I have. I sit in the dark for a long time after I hang up. I think about everything I know. I know that my sister's name is not on my savings account, only my checking account, which we opened together years ago to handle shared household bills. I know that the savings account is mine alone. I know that to access it, someone needed my ID and my signature. I know that I did not sign anything, but there is something else pulling at me now. Something underneath the financial betrayal, something I have been pushing away for months because looking at it directly would mean acknowledging the thing I do not want to acknowledge. The treatments. My sister finished her final round of chemotherapy 8 months ago. At her last oncology appointment, the one I drove her to and sat in the waiting room for 2 hours, she came out smiling and said the doctor was pleased with her progress. I hugged her in the parking lot and cried a little from relief. She did not cry. She just patted my back in that distant way of hers and said she was hungry, and could we stop somewhere. I never saw her treatment records. She always went into the appointments alone. She said she felt infantilized when I came in with her, which I understood, which I respected, so I always waited outside. I never spoke to her oncologist. I never saw a scan or a lab result. I saw pill bottles on the bathroom counter, and I drove her to appointments, and I believed her completely, because she was my sister, and she was sick, and why would anyone lie about that? I opened my laptop. I searched for the oncology practice she had been seeing. The name is on one of the bottles still in the medicine cabinet. I find their website and their patient portal login page. I stare at it for a while. Then I go to the medicine cabinet. The bottle I am looking at is a common anti-nausea medication. The prescription is filled out to my sister. The prescribing physician's name is on the label. I write it down. I search that physician's name. He retired 14 months ago. The practice his name is associated with closed shortly after. My sister told me she was still seeing him 8 months ago. I go back to her bedroom door, and I knock. She opens it in the slightly annoyed way she always opens doors. Like the interruption is a personal offense. What's the name of the doctor you've been seeing? I ask. She gives me the name. It is the retired physician. And what's the name of the oncology practice? She gives me a name. I have already confirmed it is closed. When is your next appointment? I ask. She looks at me for a moment. Something passes across her face just briefly. Just a flicker, and then she says, "Why are you interrogating me?" I'm not interrogating you. I'm asking. I'm tired, Clara. It's my birthday and I'm tired, and this feels like an interrogation. I go to my room, and I close the door, and I sit on the floor with my back against the bed, and I let myself think the thought I have been refusing to think for 2.5 years. What if she was never sick? What if none of it was real? I do not sleep that night. I spend the hours between midnight and 6 in the morning going through everything I can access. I call the hospital I drove her to for treatments. After a long, careful conversation, in which I identify myself as the emergency contact on file, a records coordinator tells me that the patient profile associated with my sister's name and date of birth has no treatment records on file beyond a single consultation visit 3 years ago. She was seen once. She was not a treatment patient. I have to press my hand over my mouth to keep myself from making a sound. I go to the bank at 8:15 when they open. David from the fraud department has left notes in the file. A colleague named Patricia walks me through everything. I provide my identification, explain the situation, and sign the forms to begin the investigation. Patricia tells me that the transactions flagged as potentially fraudulent are being frozen pending review. She also tells me, after a moment of quiet consideration, that based on what I have described, I should strongly consider filing a police report in addition to the bank's internal investigation, because what I am describing may constitute identity theft and forgery. I call the non-emergency police line from the parking lot. An officer agrees to meet me at the station at 11. I drive home first. My sister is still asleep. I take photographs of everything, the prescription bottles, the statements I printed at the bank, the notes I took during my phone calls. I put my laptop, my passport, my birth certificate, and my grandmother's house deed into my bag. Then I drive to the police station. The officer I speak to is a woman named Sergeant Delgado, and she does not rush me. I lay out everything in order. The fraudulent transactions, the wire transfer, my identification being used without my consent, the medical records that do not exist, the prescription bottles from a practice that has been closed for over a year, the retirement of the doctor whose name appears on the bottles. Sergeant Delgado takes careful notes. She tells me that identity theft and fraud are serious charges and that the investigation will take time. She also tells me that since the house is in both our names, I cannot simply remove my sister by force, but that I have legal options I should explore. She strongly recommends speaking to an attorney. I call a family law attorney from the parking lot of the police station. Her name is Catherine Webb, and she has an opening at 2 in the afternoon. I sit in my car for 20 minutes before driving to meet her. Catherine Webb is direct and organized, and she does not waste my time. I show her everything. She reviews it in the focused, efficient way of someone who has seen a version of this before. When she finishes, she looks up and she says that based on what I have provided, I have strong grounds for both the civil recovery of funds and grounds to pursue the criminal fraud claim in parallel with the police investigation. She also tells me about an option I had not considered, a legal notice to vacate, served to my sister, which would begin the formal process of establishing that the property cannot be shared under these circumstances. I authorize her to proceed. I drive home in the late afternoon light, and I sit in the driveway for a moment. I look at the oak tree in the front yard. I think about my grandmother, who planted it with my grandfather 60 years ago, and who left this house to both of us, because she believed we were each other's family, each other's home. I think about what it cost me to believe the same thing. Then I go inside. My sister is in the kitchen eating cereal. She looks up when I come in, and her expression is already arranging itself into mild annoyance, which is her default setting around me lately. "We need to talk," I say. "I have plans tonight," she says. "That's fine. This won't take long." I sit down across from her at the table. I place my phone on the table between us with the banking statements already open on the screen. "I spoke to the bank this morning," I say. "They've opened a fraud investigation. I also spoke to the police, and I've hired an attorney." She puts her spoon down. Her face is very still. "Someone used my identification to authorize a wire transfer from my savings account," I say. "Someone also made several large unauthorized withdrawals and payments over the last 2 years. The bank has documentation from those in-person visits. The police are requesting that documentation as part of their investigation." She says nothing. "I also called your oncology practice," I say. "Or I should say, the practice that closed 14 months ago. The one where Dr. Harmon, who retired before your last supposed appointment, apparently prescribed your medications." Still nothing. But she has gone very pale. "There are no treatment records, Hannah. I called the hospital. 3 years ago you had 1 consultation. That's it. You were never a treatment patient." The silence in the kitchen is so complete that I can hear the refrigerator humming and somewhere outside a car passing slowly down the street. "You were never sick," I say. She picks up her spoon again, sets it down. Her jaw tightens. "I don't know what you think you found," she starts. "I'm not asking you to explain," I say. "I'm telling you what I know. And I'm telling you that the attorney I hired this afternoon is sending formal legal notice to you at this address tomorrow morning. Because of the fraud investigation, because of the circumstances, she believes we have strong grounds to begin the process of dissolving our shared occupancy of this property." She stands up. This is my grandmother's house too. It is, I say, and that will be sorted out through the appropriate legal process. In the meantime, I'd suggest you speak to an attorney of your own. You can't just throw me out. I'm not throwing you out. I'm following the legal process. The same one you skipped when you used my ID to take my money. She opens her mouth and closes it again. I gave up 2.5 years, I say, and I am surprised by how steady my voice is. I turned down a job I had worked 6 years toward. I ended a relationship with someone I loved. I took shifts that paid less, so I could drive you to appointments for a practice that had already closed. I believed you because I loved you and because I trusted you and because it never occurred to me that you would do this. She says, very quietly, you were always going to leave anyway. The job, the boyfriend, you were always going to disappear on me like everyone does. So you decided to make sure of it. I say. She does not answer. I stand up and I pick up my phone and I go upstairs. The next 3 weeks are the most difficult and the most clarifying of my life. Catherine Webb is methodical and thorough. The bank's fraud investigation confirms that my identification was used in person, and the branch's camera footage is part of the documentation that goes to Sergeant Delgado. My sister hires an attorney. She calls me to tell me this, the same way she used to call me to tell me about upcoming medical expenses, brisk and almost challenging, waiting for me to absorb the information and accommodate it. I accommodate nothing. The police interview is long. I answer every question they ask. I provide every document I have. Sergeant Delgado tells me at the end that charges are being formally filed for identity theft and financial fraud, and that my sister will be contacted regarding the process. The case, she tells me, is solid. The civil proceedings take longer. But Catherine is patient, and so am I, because patience is something I have always had more of than was good for me, and now I am putting it to use in the right direction for the first time. The mediation session is in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building downtown. My sister sits across from me with her attorney, and she looks like she always looks composed, slightly aggrieved, certain that the specific gravity of her presence is enough to determine outcomes. Her attorney makes several arguments. Catherine responds to each one, quietly and precisely, with documentation. At the end of it, we reach an agreement. My sister will vacate the property within 60 days. A structured repayment plan for the funds taken from my accounts is established as part of the civil settlement. She does not admit guilt in the civil proceeding, that is her attorney's insistence, but the amounts are not disputed. The criminal case is separate and slower, moving through the process at the pace that legal systems move. Sergeant Delgado updates me when there is something to update. I trust the process. I have done what I can do, and now I let the systems do what they are built for. On the 58th day, my sister loads the last of her boxes into a rental car. I watch from the porch. She does not look at me until she is about to get in, and then she does. And there is something in her face that I cannot quite read, not remorse exactly, but something adjacent to it, some distant cousin of regret. I did love you, she says, in my way. I know, I say. She gets in the car and she drives away, and I stand on the porch of my grandmother's house until the car turns out of the block and disappears. Then I go inside. I call Marcus that evening. I have not spoken to him since the week I moved back home, when we said the things people say when they are ending something without wanting to say that is what they are doing. He picks up after 2 rings. I heard a rumor you've been through some things, he says, which is his way, which makes something ease in my chest. I have, I say. I'd like to tell you about them in person, if you're open to that. He is. In the first month after my sister leaves, I repaint the kitchen. I do not choose the color my grandmother had it or the color my sister preferred. I choose a green so soft it looks almost white in the morning and almost sage in the afternoon, and every time I come downstairs and see it, I feel something that takes me a while to identify as ownership, not just of the room, but of the choice. I apply for a position at a hospital 40 minutes away. The commute is manageable. The role is good, maybe not as good as Denver was, but a step in the right direction. And when the hiring manager asks why I have a gap in my resume, I tell her the truth, plainly, without performing the distress or minimizing it. I moved home to care for a family member, and the circumstances turned out to be more complicated than I anticipated. She nods in the way of someone who understands that life occasionally deposits you somewhere you did not plan to be, and she moves on to the next question. I get the job. Marcus and I have dinner twice, then a third time. We do not rush anything. We have both learned, I think, that there is no grace in rushing. The reimbursements arrive in installments as the civil settlement dictates. I do not check my account every day waiting for them. I have learned that waiting for something every day is just another form of giving that thing power over you. Catherine Webb sends me a short email 6 months after the settlement is finalized. She writes that she hopes I am well, and that she wanted me to know that outcomes like mine, where someone acts quickly, documents carefully, and trusts the process, are not always the result. That sometimes people wait too long, or feel too much guilt, or cannot bring themselves to let the legal consequences land where they belong. She says she found me to be one of the more clear-eyed clients she has worked with, and that she means that as a genuine compliment. I read it twice, and then I send her a thank you note, and I close my laptop, and I sit in my kitchen in the green light of the late afternoon, and I feel, for the first time in longer than I can remember, like I am exactly where I am supposed to be. There is a question I get asked sometimes by friends who know what happened. They ask how I knew, that night in the kitchen with the banking app open, that I was not making a mistake, that I was not jumping to conclusions, that the foundation of everything I was about to do was solid. I tell them the honest answer, which is that I was not certain. No one is ever completely certain. But I had spent 2.5 years ignoring things that did not add up, because loving someone seemed to require it, and the night my sister sat at her birthday table eating the cake I made for her and told me I was suffocating her, something in me stopped accepting that math. You can love someone and still hold them accountable. You can grieve the person you wish they were and still call the fraud department. You can stand on the porch and watch them drive away and mean it when you say, I know, and still not invite them back. The oak tree in the front yard is leafing out again. My grandfather planted it this spring after he came home from Korea. My grandmother watered it through 40 years of droughts. I have mowed around its roots every summer since I was old enough to push the mower, and I will mow around it for the rest of the years I live in this house, which I intend to be many. I go inside and I start dinner.